Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. My name is Bobby Hawk, and in a couple of moments, you'll be able to watch Opher Rom and myself talk about the history of Israel or some of the things about Israel that we find interesting. Now, all of our podcasts, the entire first season, 12 episodes, were recorded in June of 2023. The goal was to release one each month, July of 2023 through June of 2024, with the possibility of a season 2. We've released 4 episodes so far, and as I record this, it is now October of 2023. Israel is unfortunately in war, and there's unprecedented conflict in the region. So we're going to release episodes 5 through 12 over an 8-day period here in October. Again, as you listen to these, you'll probably notice a couple of things. They were meant to be released monthly, so you may hear us refer to that. We also refer to trips to the Holy Lands and the safety that we've experienced in the past. However, that's changed. I personally have had to cancel 3 trips over the next several months because of the conflict that's taking place in Israel. So I'm going to ask you to consider that as you listen or watch the podcast. Know that those were pre-recorded in June and understand that we're releasing all 8 episodes that are remaining now. So whether you're watching episode 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, they'll all be shared during this month of October as you learn more about the history of Israel, the conflict that's created for generations now, for thousands of years. It may help you even understand what's currently going on there. And also, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to pray. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for those who have lost loved ones, who are experiencing the devastation of their country, and pray that peace throughout that region would come quickly. In the meantime, I hope this is informational for you. I hope it's helpful as you learn more about an overview of Israel with Opher Rom. Now here we go. Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds with Opher Rom, the best guide in all of Israel. So good, we named the podcast after him. So congratulations, man.
Thank
and
you.
We've not been canceled yet.
I always wanted to have a podcast of my own.
Well, you are in your 10th episode of your first season.
Yes.
And the only reason we haven't been canceled is because
It's up to us.
It's up to us. So we're having a lot of fun. I hope you're enjoying this. We're now in April, coming to you. And this is episode 10 of season number 1. And this season is sponsored by CHLS, or the Center for Holy Land Studies. You can find them at thechls.org. An incredible group that takes trips to Israel, takes people like you and me. I have an opportunity to teach for them and to take groups over there. And I love it because they take care of all of the details. They run an excellent program. You get to go experience the culture, the history, the land, the spirit, how it all ties in. And but it's not possible without guides like Opher. And one of the cool things about Opher is what I call the bus talks. It's between places where Opher, instead of just letting you sit on a bus and just kind of doing your own thing, putting your headphones in and doing that, you have the opportunity, if you choose to accept it, to listen to the bus talks. And one of the things we do is an overview, but we're now calling it an overview of Israel. We go all the way back to Genesis, which we did in episode 1, all the way fast forward to really 21st century. And this 10th episode, I think we're going to get to modern day. We're the goal.
Absolutely getting there. Yes.
So let's pick it up. We left off, and we're still in the 20th century right now, but let's pick it up.
I mentioned that 1973 is a turning point in the geopolitics of Israel. And this is one of those things where you have to start understanding the culture of where Israel is. Because Israel is not an island on its own. It's a part of an entire region, which for whatever reason is called the Middle East. It's a very horrible name that I don't really like, but we'll keep it for now. And in the Middle East, the culture is very, very different than Western society. We have this idea of honor and power. And you see it in the movies sometimes, in old movies, about how somebody loses a battle or gets slapped or something happens and he has to retaliate. Doesn't matter what the law of the land is, doesn't matter who's in charge. He himself has to retaliate. Otherwise, he's going to be seen by others as a loser. And if you're seen as someone who lost his power, nobody will give you honor anymore. And this is something we have to tie into the geopolitics, even though it sounds a little far-fetched. In 1948, the Jewish people are going to create a state. They're going to defeat let's not even call it Egypt or Lebanon as specific countries. They're going to defeat the Muslim world, the Arabs. And this was an insult of the highest degree to the Muslim world, to the Arab culture. Jews, for about 1,300 years, since the rise of Islam, Jews were accepted as people of the book. So were the Christians, by the way. We are the people of the book. Judaism and Christianity are the base of Islam. The Jewish text, the Christian text are accepted in the Muslim world as holy script from God. However, when you live under the Muslim rule, there were still limitations. For example, you're allowed to build a church for your community. I'm allowed to build a synagogue. But you cannot build a church or the synagogue higher than the local mosque. You can get government positions in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, but you cannot be the prime minister or the president, because then you would be ruling, a non-Muslim would be ruling over the Muslims. They even have a name for us. We're dhimmi. It's Dhimmi. It's a special word that is used to describe the status of Jews and Christians in the Muslim world. And suddenly the dhimmi rise against Islam and defeat them. And in 1967, in 6+ days, the dhimmi, the Jewish people, do it again. They lost their power. They lost their honor. And they must get it back. And the only way to get it back is to show you I am stronger than you. So it might not be the following month. It might not be the following year or two. But eventually there has to be another war. And that's what 1973 is about. And when Israel was not able to say decisively, we won, at the end of the war, the Egyptian president took the opportunity to regain his honor. And he said, you lost. Now let's fast forward about 4 years, 1977. Sadat is the president of Egypt, and he declares that he's coming to Israel to talk about peace. The word peace was never used talking about Israel-Arab relations. Never until now. We thought it's kind of like a Trojan horse. He wants to speak in front of Parliament while he's getting ready to attack and invade and destroy us. But no, he actually came. He spoke in front of Parliament in Arabic, and he talked about peace. And in 1979, the United States was kind of, bringing everybody to the table to talk about the events. Carter, I think, was the president. And we signed a peace treaty. Not a ceasefire agreement. We signed a peace treaty with not just an Arab country, but one of the most powerful Muslim Arab countries back then anyway, a neighbor of ours. Now, we've always had a different relationship with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. They're not a very powerful nation. They don't have oil to speak of. The one thing they do have going for them is the Hashemites are considered a legitimate kingship in the Muslim world. I think it's because they can trace their lineage all the way back to Muhammad, giving them legitimacy. But they weren't a very big power player. And even though our relationship with the Hashemite kingdom for various reasons was very different, we never talked about peace with them. And yet, once Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel, it was a matter of time until the Jordanians will sign a peace treaty with us as well. They just needed someone else to make the first move. And in the 1990s, we actually signed a peace treaty with the Jordanians. So now, let's tie this in. We didn't win 1973, but because we didn't win, the Egyptian president was able to say, I got my honor back. I showed you I'm more powerful than you. If you want peace with me, here's the detailed plan. You give me back the Sinai Peninsula. For example, that was one of the demands. We gave back the Sinai Peninsula. And we signed a peace treaty with an Arab country. Amazing. And then, as I said, just a matter of time, we also signed it with the Jordanians. So not winning in 1973 made it possible for us to actually sign peace treaty with two of our neighboring countries. Jordan has the longest land border with Israel, by the way. So this is crucial. And the United States stepped into the Jordanian agreement as well to kind of facilitate and help out the proceedings. And they said that if Jordanian companies have Israelis investing in them in a certain percentage, then those Jordanian companies will have the same tax breaks as Israeli companies do when dealing with the United States. So there was some kind of measure of help from the United States in that respect as well.
Let me pause here because
Sure.
you say because we didn't win,
Yes.
and I notice intentionally you don't say we lost,
Right.
And so is that touching on now? Is that touching on later? Because that plays in a little bit
Right
right
now.
to this whole
Right now.
geopolitical
The Egyptians
thing.
took this idea that Israel didn't win, and they said, you lost. That's how they were able to say, we're now stronger. I showed you, I proved to you that I'm stronger than you. That's the mindset over here. Lose power, lose honor. Regain power, eventually regain honor. So Israel couldn't say that we won because even though we were at the footsteps of Damascus or Cairo, for the first time, we had POWs. Israelis raised the white flag and became prisoners of war. This didn't happen in 1948. We have stories of the Jewish forces that when they ran out of ammunition, they picked up stones and threw it at the Arabs because you die fighting. There's no such thing as giving up. So there was some kind of a mental break, I guess, in 1973. We were caught kind of by surprise. Not that we didn't have the information, but we didn't act on the information that we had. We can go into 1973 and what was going on before and after and the aftermath of it in another podcast. But it was a war that is engraved in the Israeli history as a war that everything failed. The system failed. Whether it was because we didn't operate on it or we didn't act the way we were supposed to, somebody dropped the ball. As a result, by the way, the Prime Minister of Israel, the first woman Prime Minister, resigned out of heartbreak. She believed that she failed so miserably because of this war that after the war she resigned. We're talking about Golda Meir. So yes, there were a lot of consequences to this war, and that's why we couldn't say decisively we won. So they said you lost. By the way, in 2013, this is the middle of chaos in Egypt. We are talking about the Muslim Brotherhood rising in Egypt. The president was being charged and then on trial. They took a break from all the chaos that was going on there, and they celebrated 40 years to the defeat of Israel. 2013, 40 years from 1973. They didn't call it the victory over Israel, but to the defeat of Israel. This was a huge part of I'm getting my pride back. I managed to show the Israelis that I beat them, or that they lost, or that I'm more powerful. However you wanna phrase it. So incredibly important that we didn't win in 1973, and peace. Now, in between the peace and with Egypt and the peace with the Jordanians, we also have an unfortunately, we have the rise of violence within the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We call them today the Palestinians. The local population within the Gaza Strip and within the West Bank picks up stones, rocks, sticks, whatever they can get their hands on, and they started throwing it at the military. Now, who's the military in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? Israel. But the Gaza Strip also has a border with Egypt. And at the same time that they were throwing these stones and violently going against the Israeli military, they were also doing the same thing to the border patrol in Egypt. Egypt is not exactly a democratic country. And when these stones were thrown at the military on the border, they received an order, shoot them. And I don't want to throw out random numbers, but a lot of people were killed in the first week or so when the Egyptian soldiers shot the Palestinians in the Gaza territory. Not a single stone was thrown at these soldiers for the next 20, 25 years on the Egyptian border. Now, Israel is a democracy, and you can't tell your military to just shoot unarmed civilians And we're not even talking about citizens of your state. We're talking about a population that is under military control. What do? We had no idea. And it takes us time to figure it out. We would go around the world to democratic countries asking them what they think we should be able to do or not do. We went to the US, we went to the British, the French, the Spanish, whatever you want, whoever you can think of, we went to them. And no one really knew what to tell us. And by the time you figure out what you can and cannot do, and you pass the laws, because in a democratic countries you have to abide by the law, years are going by. Thousands are being injured and killed on both sides. Now, Israel has weapons. They have stones. Obviously, there's going to be more casualties on the Palestinian side. And things eventually start calming down. And we're talking now, it starts around 1988, the end of the 1980s. We're now in 1992, 1993, 4 or 5 years of violent events that are taking place. And the Palestinians find a leadership headed by a guy called Yasser Arafat, and they decide it's time to talk to the Israelis. And we go to Oslo. And the Israeli side sends Shimon Peres, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, and they come to what we call today the Oslo Accords. And the main thing about the Oslo Accords was that for the first time, an Israeli government is willing to accept the idea that the Palestinians are a people and that they should have a state of their own. I'll be completely honest with you. Most of what the Oslo Accords talks about is what we don't agree on. There are very few things we actually do agree on. One of them is, as I said, the Palestinians should have a state of their own. We don't agree on how big that Palestinian state is going to be. We don't agree on what's going to happen with Jerusalem. We don't agree on what's going to happen with electricity. Are they going to build their own power stations? Are they going to buy from Israel? What about water issues? What about Palestinian refugees? Are they going to be able to come into Israel and live in the state of Israel? Are they only going to be able to come into this newly founded country called Palestine? These 5 are the big issues. We didn't agree on small issues either. Mm-hmm. So we agreed that there should be a Palestinian state. And another thing that we did agree on is that the Palestinians don't know how to rule, and therefore we can't just give them a piece of territory and say, rule. It has to be in stages. So the Oslo Accords basically said, we're going to start somewhere. We're going to divide the West Bank into a few different ruling areas, giving the Palestinians either less or more control of the region. And over the next 5 years, they're going to prove to us that they can rule that area. And then during that time, we'll give more and more area so that they have more and more self-control. And during these 5 years, we'll also talk about all the things we didn't agree on until now. But we have to start somewhere. This was ratified in the Israeli parliament, and the Oslo Accords are a go. And we divide. The initial division is in place. Even today, the initial division is in place. They called it A, B, and C. Territory A stands for, let's say, Arafat autonomy. That means that the Palestinians create a Palestinian authority, which is in charge of everything that goes on in Territory A. They collect the taxes, and in return, they need to make sure that the roads are drivable, that the sewage system works, that the trash is being removed, education, medicine, postage, just like any other community in the world that has, autonomy in that area. But they're also in charge of security. Security means they need guns. Israel supplies the guns. The United States steps into this agreement as well, and they're going to provide the security teams with training. This is Territory A. Not a lot of area in the West Bank is considered Territory A. Very specific areas. And then we have Territory B. B stands for both. That means that Israel is in charge of security. The Israeli military is still there. But the Palestinians are going to take care of the social aspects. So the sewage and the trash and the medicine and the education and all the rest of those things. And Area C, which was the majority of the area of the West Bank according to the Oslo Accords, Area C is complete control of Israel. That means that the military of Israel is still there, and they are in charge of the roads, and they're in charge of the sewage system and the trash removal and everything else and so on and so forth. It doesn't mean that Israeli soldiers will fix the road if there's a problem. It means that the military will be notified not the Palestinians. And then the Israeli military will find some kind of a civilian contractor that deals with road work and make sure that road gets fixed. That was the idea. And then during the next 5 years, the Palestinians show that they can control territory A. Slowly, territory C turns into B, giving them a little bit more social control. And then later, territory B will turn into A, giving them complete control. And we're going to discuss during these 5 years how big the state is supposed to be. It basically ended there. We did the initial division. 5 years went by, and instead of having progress, I would say it deteriorated, because the more the Palestinians ruled an area, the more the surrounding Jewish communities felt threatened. And now they're having guns. Now, one of the big discussions between left and right politics in Israel back in the 1990s, before the Oslo Accords were signed, was the right-wingers said, you're giving them guns? These guns will be used against us. This is the beginning of the end of the state of Israel. It didn't take 5 years, a little bit more. And in the year 2000, we have the second event of violence. The first one at the end of the 1980s, and now at the beginning of the year 2000, we have the second one. It's called Intifada. The word Intifada is an Arabic word that describes the act of a dog shaking itself, trying to get rid of fleas. So this is the second Intifada now. And now they have weapons. A much more bloody, violent event. Again, a few years go by. Obviously, we have different governments and all sorts of things are going on. Somewhere in the middle, around 2003, the Israeli government, headed by a guy called Ariel Sharon, decides to build a physical barrier between the West Bank and Israel. Some call it a wall, some call it a fence. The majority of it is, of course, a fence, but where there is close proximity, where it's walking distance between the Palestinian area and the Jewish area, they built an actual wall. This is not just a wall that goes up about 24 feet. It also goes down about 20 feet or so. So it's difficult to tunnel under. With all of these new defense systems and so on, and the wall is being built, the violence level drops. And Arafat, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority, is going to die. And after the death of Arafat, there are, let's call it, elections. I can't say democratic elections, but there are elections as to who's going to take over the Palestinian Authority area. And the U.S. thought that if they back the, the second in command of Arafat, then he'll surely win. They were wrong. And what we found is that after the elections in the Gaza Strip, Hamas takes over. Hamas, for 20 years, if not more, was not allowed by Arafat to become a political entity. And what did they do? They went into the school systems, after-school activities for kids, soup kitchens, helping out the population. And when there were those elections, the platform that Hamas ran on was change and reform. Don't vote for the Palestinian Authority members. All the money that the world gave to help the Palestinians went into their private bank account. They're corrupt. Look at the BMWs and the Mercedes cars that they're driving. Look at the houses, the villas that they're living in. They have helicopter landing pads in those homes. They have 4 different brand new cars for each of the children that they have, living the good life with a swimming pool in the south of the Gaza Strip. Those are actual villas and mansions that they live in. Don't vote for them. Vote for change and reform. Vote for us. We've shown you for the past 20 plus years that we take care of the population. And some of the Palestinians within the Gaza Strip actually thought that they're doing something to better their lives, so they voted for Hamas. Others voted because there was a guy with a gun in the polling booth telling them who to vote for. Either way, at the end of the voting, Hamas takes over. Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by the world, not just by Israel. And the lives of the Palestinians became worse in the Gaza Strip for sure. There was a purge. In the Arab world, when you win, when you take over, you need to purge your enemies. So there's nobody there to stand up to you. It came to a point where the Israeli military had to go into the Gaza Strip to take the leaders of the Palestinian Authority to safety and bring them over to the area of the West Bank. And since then, basically, Gaza is run by Hamas. Now, the Palestinian Authority is I don't know if in reality, but they're supposedly the rulers of the West Bank. So now we have two completely different entities, one in the West Bank, one in the Gaza Strip, that don't like each other much. And Israel is somewhere in the middle of this. We've had more operations sometimes nowadays, again, because we allow the Palestinians, according to the Oslo Accords, to have weapons. Once you have weapons, there's really no way to control it. They have tunnels coming in from the Sinai Peninsula where you can drive a car in these tunnels. These are not tunnels that you crawl through. Mm-hmm. And they're bringing in everything they want, whether it's for the sake of the population or weapons, they're bringing it all. Nowadays, we have rockets that they're trying to smuggle in these places, in these tunnels. So they're also trying to bomb Israel. This is a very confined area. You hear about this in the news sometimes, rockets attack on Israel. And Israel has to defend itself, obviously. Our technology is quite incredible. One of the things that Israel is known for nowadays is that we are one of the most high-tech countries in the world. And one of the things we specialize in, unfortunately, is defense weapons. And the newest defense weapon we have is something people really thought is not possible. This is a rocket defense missile system that basically configures while the rocket is in midair within a couple of seconds where it's going to land. Is it going to land in a populated area or not? And if we need to, we launch our own anti-rocket to hit it in midair so that it doesn't fall on unpopulated areas. And the reason why people didn't think that it could happen is because the rockets that are being launched from the Gaza Strip are actually not necessarily factory-made rockets. That means that a little bit of an inch is different in the wing of the rocket. It changes the way that it's going to act in the air. So how do you create a system that takes all of that into account, and yet Israelis were able to do it with funding from the United States, by the way. There's a lot of cooperation. Israel is at the forefront of modernity. You can't talk about almost anything in modern day technology that doesn't have Israel or Israeli patents in there.
Yeah, let's. I want to come back to that, Opher, but just for our listeners, a couple of quick things. So one, this is when you start to understand territory A, B, and C. When you understand the Gaza Strip, when you understand the conflicts, we still, most of us, don't understand because we don't have that. We don't even have a reference point to say, like I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas is here, but in between we have this, and this group controls this, and this group controls this, but yet this group that lives here, we don't have a reference point for that. And so it's hard for people to understand, but then the flip side is that's what does make the news.
Yes.
And so that's what creates a fear, if you will, for people who would like to maybe go on a trip and they say, yeah, but I just hear about, this Gaza Strip and I hear about these rockets. And we're talking about a very, very, very small piece. We're talking about a very centralized area. And when I've been over there before and they've been firing rockets off from Gaza, I wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for social media.
Sure.
Because I would have had no idea. But what you mentioned about the Iron Dome defense system, it really is. A lot of times the reports we'll get here are this many rockets were fired. A lot of them, these handmade rockets, right? Some of them even explode and kill their own people.
Yeah.
That's what happens. But these rockets, and it'll say, so many of them were taken out. Well, some of the times what you're saying is some of the reasons the other ones aren't taken out, they're not at populated areas.
Exactly. They might fall in an open field. They might fall in the Mediterranean Sea.
Right. So
you don't know.
You don't know. So even when it says that only so many of these were taken out, there's an intentionality But I think what it is I think it's another example of God giving the wisdom to people, right, to create this, to again protect Israel in overcoming the odds, as we just continue to talk about, because it truly amazing that a country, relatively speaking, is so small compared to the rest of the world, and yet has such amazing technology. Now, what are some of the other, I mean, you mentioned patents. I've heard you talk about this before. It really is fascinating. Some of the things that we see or use every day originate from Israel.
Well, let's start with the obvious: cell phones. Israeli technology right there. The second language that every Windows operating system comes out in is Hebrew. Okay, it comes out in English, and because almost half of the engineers in Silicon Valley for Microsoft are Israelis, then the second language that it comes out of is Hebrew. There are maybe 15 million people in the entire world that can read Hebrew. So imagine that Windows is coming out in Hebrew before Chinese or Spanish, for example. We have cherry tomatoes, if we're not going necessarily to technology, but to agriculture. We have drip irrigation, revolutionizing the world of irrigation of fields. Instead of wasting water, which is a precious commodity, maybe the most important one in the world, you take pipes on the ground, and with specific holes in specific areas, it drips to the root of the plant, and that's enough. We have flash drives. Everybody uses flash drives. The commercial Intel inside, it's probably supposed to be Israel inside. Intel today has 3 research and development centers in Israel with a population of less than 9.5 million people. In all of China, they have 2 research and development centers. Israelis are inventing things while they're walking in the streets. We are only second to the United States in terms of patents per capita. We are nowadays third on the NASDAQ exchange in terms of Israeli companies traded on NASDAQ. Satellite TV, the chip that actually receives the signal from the satellite that you have in the box on your TV, that's an Israeli-made chip. Fiber optics, all of these things. 1 out of 3 pills sold in the United States is a Teva-made pill.